What's up, everyone? Welcome to the latest episode of the HashKey Learn series, where we speak to experts and professionals in the world of digital assets to understand the most pressing and important subjects in the cryptocurrency industry. Now, today's episode is a spicy one. We are going to talk about crypto myths and misconceptions. Now, it's been more than 10 years since the founding of Bitcoin, and we are nearing the 10th year anniversary of Ethereum. So I think it's fair to say that we have a decent structure in place when it comes to the cryptocurrency framework and ecosystem. But as far as industries go, right, this industry is still very young and very nascent. And there's just plenty of misconceptions out there or people struggling to understand how exactly does this industry work. Now, today we have selected 5 of the most prominent and biggest crypto myths and picked them apart one by one. Let's get started. Now, today I have my colleague, Mark Wong, who's a senior trader at HashKey, who's based in our Singapore office, to debunk, demystify, and shed some light on the facts of these most prevalent and pervasive myths about cryptocurrencies. Now, Mark, before we dive into our conversation, how about you introduce yourself real quick, tell us a bit about your background and how you got into crypto in the first place?
Thank you, Jason. I'm a trader at HashKey, and I've been a trader through my whole career. I've been trading equity index futures, Forex, and mostly specializing in NDS, as well as currently I'm trading cryptocurrencies. So I've been trading for around 10 years now, and I got into cryptocurrencies like most people around 2017, 2018 during that bull run. I was there for the greed, sort of trying to maximize return on assets and investments. And I stayed mostly because I started to talk to people about what cryptocurrencies is really about and understood more about the merits and the need for decentralized currencies.
Cool.
And right now, I'm a strong believer in it. Yeah.
Great. Well, I'm sure your initial investment in 2017 turned out pretty well, right? So I guess let's just dive into the conversation. So let's first address the first myth. So a lot of people say that because Bitcoin isn't backed by anything, it's not considered a real currency, and thus it has no intrinsic value. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think that a backed currency comes with some sort of guarantee that it cannot be exchanged, can be exchanged for a predetermined amount of another asset. However, because Bitcoin in itself is decentralized, it is not backed, it's not controlled by any one person or any central entity. And therefore, it's difficult for any institution to want to make a promise or guarantee that we are able to switch this for a certain amount of some US dollars or any other asset. So inherently, currencies have value because people believe they do. And they are willing to use it as an intermediary for trade or transfer of value. Some of the intrinsic values of Bitcoin that make it really good as a candidate for a global currency are that it has a limited supply. It is unable to be counterfeited since it operates on a blockchain ledger. It's easily transportable and divisible and tradable as well. And hence, right now, actually, it's already legal tender in 2 countries, which means it's officially recognized by the law to settle debt or meet financial obligations, these 2 countries are namely El Salvador and Central African Republic.
Yeah, I think speaking of El Salvador and Central African Republic, they are countries that have adopted Bitcoin as legal tender. So that kind of quells the myths that, Bitcoin isn't a real currency, thus it has no use cases, right? But yes. I think there are some other use cases of Bitcoin. I think one of the biggest one is remittances, right? People making payments across borders, across countries. Can you tell us more a bit about that kind of utility?
Yeah, so certain blockchains can be used to transfer value across nations. If you transfer a gold bar, for example, it'll be very difficult for you to cut up a gold bar and divide it or send it across to another foreign currency. Or if you did an international wire, like you use Western Union, there are a lot of remittances and fees involved in these wires. Whereas for Bitcoin, it's just a transaction blockchain fee, which at the moment is relatively low.
Yeah. And then I think apart from the fact that, using Bitcoin to transfer money, you can overcome middlemen, you can overcome these agencies like Western Union. I think another prominent use case is that it can help bank the unbanked, right? There's lots of people who don't have bank accounts. And then, if they prefer to get paid in Bitcoin, I think that kind of overcomes the obstacle that they don't have bank accounts, so they cannot receive salary, right?
Definitely, and that's why we see that the use case of Bitcoin is more prevalent in certain countries. The thing is, the more developed a country is, the less likely they are to require a different currency. But in certain countries like Afghanistan, Vietnam, where there's very high inflation, or Turkey, for example, people are more and more turning towards alternative sources. And that is also why predominantly the two nations that have adopted Bitcoin as legal tender are big in remittances.
Let's talk about the second myth, and this is a fun one, right? Until now, we still hear people say that, Bitcoin is mainly used by criminals and terrorists for illegal activities and other nefarious purposes. Can you quell that myth for us?
Sure, Jason. So the thing is, a proportion of all currency or any store of value, like if you use diamonds, for example, they will unfortunately always be used for some proportion, always be used for illegal activities. And in the beginning, many early Bitcoin transactions were in fact taking place on the Silk Road, which is sort of a darknet marketplace. However, this was shut down in 2013 already, and the proportion of illegal to legal transaction is changing over the years. The trend is going downhill significantly. So according to Chain Analysis, in 2019, criminal activity represented about 2.1% of all global cryptocurrency transactions. When in 2020, we see it going down to just 0.3%. And in 2021, that number is only 0.15%. And to keep things in perspective, we're going to compare this to traditional, say, US dollar, for example. UN estimates that about 2 to 5% of these dollars are actually being used for money laundering or other illicit activities. So proportionally, actually, cryptocurrencies is less illegal.
Yeah. And I think criminals have learned it the hard way in terms of using crypto to conduct their activities, because in a lot of cases, these authorities have been successful in actually tracing the origin and provenance of these nefarious activities through the blockchain ledger, right? So I think in most cases, it actually might be safer for criminals to go with fiat money rather than crypto, right?
Yes, exactly. I would say depends on the crypto you're using. A lot of the blockchains are very transparent. So Bitcoin and Ethereum, there's always all your transactions appear on the ledger, and it's all traceable. And hence, it may be difficult for criminals to get away with their activity. Whereas privacy coins maybe will be a bit of better use case for criminals in this aspect. However, like we mentioned, the numbers are still it's still better for them to use fiat for now. It's harder to trace.
Well, let's talk about the third myth, right? So a lot of people are also saying that Bitcoin or just cryptocurrency in general is just too volatile to do anything, and investing in it is just simply a matter of gambling. What do you say to that?
Yeah. So the volatility exists against the US dollar, but historically the returns have more than justified the volatility. And in absolute terms, for example, even at current depressed levels that we have, we're like 70+% down from the highs. So we have Bitcoin has a compound annualized return of more than 100% over the last 10 years and more than 40-something% over the last 5 years, which is very impressive actually. And if we use risk-adjusted returns, so traditional financial institutions like to use a Sharpe ratio, it's still performing better at about 1.53 against compared to, for example, stocks which are at 1.22. So that's quite impressive. So another issue that we can work with is if we think that it's too dangerous, perhaps it's just better, or too volatile, it's perhaps better to lower the size of the position. And then to that sense, you still get the exposure and you don't, have the sleepless night kind of feeling.
Yeah. And I think despite the fact that you mentioned, like as of recording this video, Bitcoin is down 70% from its all-time high. I think it's also important to look at the wider picture, right? Now, of course, for every investment, past performances doesn't indicate or guarantee future performance. But as you mentioned, it's apparent that Bitcoin's long-term trend line over the last decades has been, I guess over the last few years has been upward, right? I think in 2018, it's around like 3,000. And then by the end of 2019, it's close to 8,000, 2020, close to 30,000, and 2021, close to 46,000. So I think as you mentioned, it's, when in doubt, zoom out, right? That's the crypto saying. So
yeah, that's right. That's right.
So let's go to the fourth myth. So there's some people who have been saying that it's difficult for institutions to get involved in cryptocurrencies due to the lack of liquidity, and that crypto is influenced and guided by the retail market. Now, how accurate is this?
I think both institutions and retail market have part to play in the cryptocurrency environment, but it continues to be easier to gain exposure to cryptocurrencies. So I think you can see that regulation is coming into play in the ecosystem, and in 2021, SEC approved the ProShares ETF launch, and that allows exposure to Bitcoin futures contract. And worldwide, we have launches. For example, in Canada, Fidelity launched a spot Bitcoin ETF last year as well. In fact, even currently, we have a lot more market makers coming into the business. So recently, Citadel and Virtue Financial, they got together and sort of, they're looking to explore crypto market making, and they're trying to create a cryptocurrency trading platform, which all in all just increases liquidity. And the volume of cryptocurrency transactions are actually really big. It's like 15.8 trillion in 2021. And that's, more than 40 billion a day. A lot of it is in spot and derivatives, and mostly derivatives. But overall, the amount of trades is just big enough for you to deploy your positions as an institution, I believe.
Mm-hmm. Now, is it fair to say that crypto is influenced by whoever has got the most capital, which is the institutions and whales, right?
Yeah, I think that is probably accurate, because in general, whether or not it's stocks or cryptocurrencies, any sort of market environment, price is always determined by demand and supply. And the people who are able to take action on these are the whales, for example. But that being said, stock equity indexes are also influenced by whales as well, or even Forex. Some people believe that it's influenced by central banks and whales. But in any case, all of these are still investable assets.
So let us go to our final myth. And this is also one that, is pretty relevant. And maybe some of you out there are also encountering this problem, is that the process of buying or using crypto is just too complicated. And then you have to be tech savvy or young in order to understand that. Can you demystify that for us, Mark?
So cryptocurrencies is relatively new, and in so doing a new technology space, there's always going to be some dangers. There's going to be some scams. There's going to be some phishing links. One way you can purchase coins would be through an exchange. So, for example, some of the exchanges, Binance, FTX, Coinbase, or Kraken, depends on what is good in the domain that domicile of the trader and the investor. But it is significantly harder for you to buy, say, a Bitcoin than compared to a share of Tesla, for example. And there are a lot of constraints to trying to get your money on board from a bank to the crypto ecosystem and vice versa. So the thing is, as the ecosystem starts to grow, there's also increased regulatory scrutiny, and the KYC process is starting to get a bit more stringent over the years, which is good as well if you see it this way, because it prevents criminal activity and makes everything more legalized and legitimate. But a lot of scams to watch out for, and mostly, for example, if you go to the exchange link, you search Coinbase.com, and suddenly there's an ad that says Coinbase but with two N's or two B's, then sometimes some of these are just pure phishing links, and they'll just take your money.
There's just plenty of resources, courses, and videos on the internet that you can use as guides, right? So I think in most cases, I think some people still think that, if I use crypto, I need to be involved in very convoluted stuff, such as like writing codes or like reading 1,000-word instruction manuals. But that's just not the case. I think over the past year, we've seen lots of people who previously are never in this industry, for example, like artists and celebrities, get into this space. Can you tell us more a bit about that?
So celebrities, they probably have some sort more assistance. They may have a personal assistant. They may have someone to help them, guide them through the process. But if you're an individual retail sort of investor, then definitely you need to do some homework, I would believe, to keep your money safe in this current environment.
Well, I guess that is also a good point to end today's discussion. So, I think based on today's conversation, you can tell that, there's lots of misunderstanding in this industry. And I think these misunderstanding is just the perfect breeding ground for misinformation. So I think it's important to know what is true and what is wrong in this very nascent and young industry. And if you have any questions, there's plenty of resources online to guide you through that process and demystify whatever myth it is that you believe. If you're watching this on YouTube, feel free to subscribe and leave a like. Thank you again, Mark, for your time, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you so much, Jason.
Thank you.